I want to thank you very much for being a part of our fundraiser for First Responder Project. Appreciate your time, and we'll jump right into the conversation.
Okay.
So, Kristin, can you tell us about your experiences as a law enforcement spouse, a law enforcement officer spouse, and in particular, your personal experience with the loss of both your son and your husband?
Okay. So, as a spouse, I will say, I learned a lot about what law enforcement officers deal with every day. Jeff Carroll was my spouse, and he was a detective for the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. And we were married 5 years. So as a spouse, I learned just kind of like more stuff maybe than I wanted to sometimes, just the things that they deal with on a daily basis and the things that they see, um, which kind of made my world a little like I wouldn't considered myself naive before by no means, but it really opened up my world to maybe I was a little bit. And just to see, like, wow, like there's so much that he has to deal with every day. Well, all of them, but personally for me, like what he has to deal with every day being a law enforcement officer. So, I mean, as a spouse, you really try to be supportive, but sometimes it's just hard because like I'm not built as that person, the way he was, or people that are law enforcement officers to deal or hear with, or even hear about some of the stuff that they have to deal with. And so, I learned a lot through that, which we'll talk about later. But then moving on to the deaths of my son, it was my stepson, it was Jeff's son, but, it's our children. And, and Jeff, through suicide, and they both took their own life not quite 3 months apart in 2018, September and December of 2018. And with my son, he didn't live with us. He was, older. He wasn't a young child, and so there wasn't really answers. There are a lot of questions, as often there are. I have with Jeff, I have a lot deeper insight to what was going on even prior to deaths and prior to suicide, and during that hard time. So that's something that I could definitely share.
We appreciate you doing that. It's a devastating loss to lose one person to suicide, and of course, as you said, you lost both your stepson and your husband in a very short period of time. What, for our listening audience, that's a lot to imagine, bearing in the heart and soul. What types of experience, reflecting back on your husband's last few months on the job, were there signs or anything about demeanor or things that, of course, as you look back in hindsight, that you recognize and that you notice?
So I will say, before losing our son, demeanors just and stresses from, and I always like to talk about this, just from the job in general, you could, there's some stress that I could recognize that was taking place, and that he talked about, like I was saying earlier, that we would talk about, and we talked often about outlets for that me as a spouse, going back to what I was saying, like I'm not built for some of those stories, some other outlets that could be helpful for that, which I feel they all need. But then once the added stress and devastation from losing a son, just anyway, but suicide, it has different challenges too, to dealing with loss like that. I did recognize withdrawal. That was like the biggest thing that I recognized, because we were just best friends and he talked to me about things. I mean, everything. That's who we talked to. We were always doing things together, and I saw not just him not speaking, but withdrawal physically, go into other rooms. And when we're both dealing with what we deal with, it's really hard to go, well, is that just because he lost his son? Like, is that normal? You just want to be left alone? Um, and we talked about it, and there were times in the beginning that knowing what I know about suicide, that I mean, was out up front. His father was up front. We asked the question, are you thinking that way too? Are you feeling that way? And at the time, he probably was not. And he said no. Um, maybe it was and just didn't want to say anything. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, mental health is so fragile, especially when you go through something like that. And so, the withdrawal was a big thing. It was big that I noticed, that I would bring up and say, now, if you need time alone, I understand, but just know, like, I'm here and that we have to do this together.
Were you able to address some of the things that you did notice? Was it difficult to start a conversation about that when you're thinking about just looking back on Jeff's career and your time together? Were there times that you could tell that something was stressful for him, that something was weighing on him? Were you able to approach him with those things, or was it just understood that you're there, when he needed a sounding board?
So before or after, or both?
Both.
Both. Yes, I was able to approach. And I will tell you, and one of the things that, we're trying to work on is that is very hard for, and honest, a big, tough detective to want to talk about those things and not even want to, but just like feel comfortable, because that's not who really they're built to be. They're really built to be. I mean, they have an elite skill that when I talk about that a lot, and maybe not really know how either. And so we were free in our conversations, but I don't know how much he wanted to tell me before, because he, didn't want me to be frightened for him to leave anymore than I already was every single day. So it's that protection mode, which is, that's what law enforcement officers are built to do, protect. But then, like I said, in the conversations that we've had, that I'm like, some things you can't tell me, like those are things that will make me have nightmares for 2 weeks. I'm not built, like I said earlier, built that way. So in some ways, like before, yes, but he would protect me. And then, like I said, just didn't really know how, because that's not who he's supposed to be, or that's not his makeup. Not understanding that, like, you really got to protect that skill that you have by keeping your mental health, protected. What's the word I'm trying to say? But conditioned, that's the word. But even during and during, it's kind of the same thing. Is not to appear weak, during the grief, that the time that he did deal with it after losing our son, still could approach, but there still was the resistance.
Oftentimes when we're talking to spouses, we hear about this, almost like this invisible force field, that there's a sense that something is not okay, but we can't quite put our finger on it. And I think the same goes for first responders, is that they sense that something is off or not wrong, or that they're full, and they need to be able to decompress or recalibrate in some way. They can't quite put their finger on it. And that bothers people when they can't point to something tangible. For Jeff, of course, there was the loss of your son was the most tangible event to point to. I imagine that at other times in Jeff's career and in your marriage, there were moments where you could sense that there was a weight, or sense that there was something there.
Right.
Were there ways that you could break down walls, break down some of the defenses that Jeff made?
Well, to be honest with you, we had, and this is a story, but for you, but we had, honestly, I was out of town when we found out about our son, but we had talked on the phone at 11 o'clock that night. And we had talked about just like that I could tell there were some things, just again, job related, and things that I know that he had seen and dealt with in the job. And we had talked about, trying to find some outlets for him, and that it's good for you. And he finally agreed. I really think, like, I do think that some mental health outlets would be great. I said, we'll go together. I mean, just because with a counseling background, I'm all about that, for myself, for everybody. And so we had agreed to that. That was 11 o'clock that night. And then we found out at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
And so we just never got there. So it's
Right.
like, it's the tip of the iceberg that I wish we had gotten there, as I always say, because it would have been really nice to have a person who is already connected with to talk to right away. Some, skills and strategies already built in, maybe some other stuff already dealt with. Who knows if that would have helped, but who knows if it wouldn't have. So.
As with anything in our lives, we always need a person, whether that person is a professional, whether that person is a family member, a trusted friend, advisor, mentor. But we want to have those relationships already set, because otherwise we're behind the eight ball. If we wait to figure out how to deal with anxiety or depression or whatever may be troubling us, until that moment, then we have all that work to do. So establishing those relationships with, again, whomever it may be, is so essential, as you said, to just have that in place. So when the call needs to be made at 3 a.m. of, hey, I need an ear, I need you to come just be with me. Those relationships are there. And it's easy to say, okay, there are all these coworkers and all these peers around, just as we may have in our lives. It's very difficult to make that step, to make that call, to kind of essentially make yourself vulnerable to say, I'm stoic and I am professionally on point. I can do the job, and I am struggling with these things and I can't even put my finger on it. I think it's difficult for first responders who kind of grow up in that other family of stoicism, of strength, of perseverance, of all these it's just that part of the camaraderie is that we've got this. We are lean in people. We are in the fight, to be able to step back and say, okay, now I need to take a knee. I need to drop my pack for a minute. I need to reset, recalibrate. I don't know what that looks like, but it doesn't mean I'm lesser than. It doesn't mean I'm capable of handling that. We as spouses can say that all day long. It's just we're really battling a culture.
It is, yeah. And when I speak to new recruits and on that topic, I really try to relate it to, I say, like a professional athlete. And I'm like, they are not allowed to just show up on game days and play. Their bodies won't make it that way. They have to condition and they have to do all of these things to take care of their bodies before they're allowed to just play, or else they're going to like have a breakdown physically. And so that's why I say, like, yes, you are stoic, you are, but you're conditioning to stay that stoic person, and that law enforcement officer that you want to be is mental. And of course, some physical, but mental. And so, right, we have to change the culture to where you don't look at it where they don't look at it as, I'm not being stoic, I have to go get help, instead of going, this is part of the job and I want to stay this way. And so I need to stay conditioned, and I need to just make sure that I do what I need to do to keep the mental health where it needs to be able to be the best law enforcement officer I can be. So it is just like culturally, stop thinking, I mean, in other jobs too, just our world, people to stop thinking that like all things can only go wrong and everything else in your body at some point in your time, but with your brain, that'll never happen. You know what I mean? And being okay with like, hey, guess what? This is the way I feel. And we, as the people that are listeners, practicing, okay, well, let's call the doctor. Like hey, that happens. It's all right. So
I like how you reframed it into conditioning, and absolutely the body needs to hold up so that we can do the job, that people can meet those wickets, make sure that they have that physical capability. But ultimately, if what's going on up here and what's going on inside of us as a human being, which is really why first responders do the job that they do, and why they feel compelled and feel passionate, and sometimes almost even addicted to that life of service, that has to be checked as well. As that if it's maybe it's not so much a matter of help as if you can't do it on one's own, but that there needs to be naturally an unloading, or an offloading of information, or of just emotionally laden events and experiences, for the same reason that line of duty personnel are very compassionate. That compassion is what can also create either scars or scar tissue.
Mhm.
And as we know,
Right.
scars are visible, and but they don't have any functional impairment. They're simply a surface, a mark of a surface wound from the past, whereas scar tissue can actually trip us up. It can keep us from having not only just literal range of motion, but emotional range of motion. So a lot of times we see in military and for civilian first responders is that there's that constriction of emotion, that the range that used to be there isn't there anymore. So it's really dialed in into a much more narrow band, which is really difficult for family members because we can see that transition sometimes very starkly and immediately, and probably more often than not, it's just this gradual shift. But we may have the same emotional range, but now we find ourselves partnered with someone who is maybe even very dichotomous, more of a flip switch instead of a dimmer switch, which we need, for that person to roll up and down. But the job really may require just being, on the job in the moment requires that on off switch. That just doesn't, translate very well to family life.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the issues that you faced in the early months in the first year after you lost your son and Jeff?
Is just well, the biggest thing is that you have no control over grief. And it doesn't matter what you try to do, all the things that you try to do, like you have to work with the grief, but work on the grief. Um, and so I mean, like your whole world changes. I mean, you said things that you thought and believed before, you start to question and wonder. And the whole sense of, I really don't have control is scary. And just the immense loss and just missing, that person, from my case, those people. Um, it's just really hard, but it's such a fog in the first year. You just are really pushing to get through it. And especially if you have kids that are left here, kids that are here with me still on earth and working through that and helping them understand. You're just really surprised when you do kind of come out of the fog a little bit, that wow, like I can't believe I made it through that. But I will say it does take, like I said, a lot of work working through the grief and turning to people and building a community and talking about it. And if you feel like you need to cry, you cry. It's not about holding stuff in again and being stoic. I mean, most of us are stoic in some way. Well, you don't want to just like cry your eyes out, in front of everybody,
Mhm.
but you have to feel those emotions and talk about them. And like for me, say, God got me through it, but it was from the people in the community that was placed before me. It wasn't a magic wand. It was work, and it was having someone to talk to. It was going and getting therapy. My children, having therapy for them.
Mhm.
And the biggest thing is it's just so hard to go through each step of grief and not try to have control over that. It's so hard to lose control of your whole life and your beliefs that you had, and to gain them back. The biggest part is these people are not here with you to turn to go through it. It's because they're gone that you're going through this, and the immense just missing them so much. But the huge need, like I said, to have a community and have people to talk to and to go through those feelings. And when you have stuff placed in front of you, like I said, it's not a magic wand. It's not going to just go away. To use those people, use your, like you were saying earlier, if it's your mom, if it's a therapist, if it's a preacher, kind of use them all. I mean, because sometimes one person isn't going to be available, so you build a community. And I don't know. So, and it's just still step by step. And there are some days that still need that, and the days in between are longer now, but it's to always ask for help and just be honest.
Mhm.
And if like I used to say, I used to, like, if I would tear up at something, I go, sorry. Now, like, I don't say sorry
Mhm.
anymore. Like, if it's just a little tear, I get teared up. It's okay. It's normal. Like that's like my body trying to just help me out here during this moment. Um, but it's really difficult. But I can say, so when I go and I speak and I say, talk to people, get therapy, you have to reach out, build that community. I say, I'm not up here just lecturing. I'm speaking from
Mhm.
experience. I have people in my family dealing with this that did not do that. And they suffered with the steps of grief much longer,
Mhm.
much harder. I mean, you could see the difference. And if you did reach out and talk and work through that, and then if you just try to keep it inside.
Right. There's an old philosophical saying that grief is itself a medicine. And I think you told me a while back about the science of tears.
Mhm.
Can you speak to that real briefly?
So the science of tears, it talks about how, you can read research on this, about how they studied tears from like onions or just like happy tears, and then the different makeup of those tears from stress tears, which release a lot more cortisol. And that's another something else. If you look at the research on that and what that does to your brain, it's released when you are stressed, it's released through stress, and how much damage it can do to your brain,
Mhm.
mental health wise, or just other damages if you have too much of a buildup of it from stress. Well, in the science of tears, it was released through like crying, anguish, upsetting tears. There was a difference in their chemical makeup.
Mhm.
So, after I read that, I'm just like, yeah, because I will tell you, there's times before all this of like a good cry. Like, I really felt better after a good cry. I'm like, well, when I read that Science of Tears, I'm like, that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's releasing all that stuff that's being caught, that cortisol that's being trapped in my brain and making things really bad. So,
Emotion is energy, right? So it
Mhm.
wants to find its way out. When we're anxious, we bounce our knee, we pace, we move in an agitated way. And it's that energy just needing to get to the outside of us. When we're angry, we kick or throw or yell vehemently. That's that same emotion trying to get on the outside of us. It's not
Right.
meant to be stuffed, it's just unnatural to
Oh,
hold. And when we do hold it in because maybe we're in the moment or we have to remain maybe professional or stoic, at some point, if it's not expressed, it festers and it turns into something unrecognizable, or we displace it onto someone else. So we take whatever is going on inside and throw it onto some unsuspecting person like our child or our pet or our spouse. And it can get very confusing very quickly. Someone once said to me, that sometimes the only way to gain control is to let go of it.
mhm.
And it was a very profound statement when I heard that. And for someone who likes to be in control of
Mhm.
things, that was an undeniable truth,
Yeah.
one that I had to chew on quite a few times. And I think when we're talking about grief, it is a process that must occur in some way, and everyone goes about that differently. I think that expressing either if it's tearfulness or talking about someone, it is a form of love. It is a form of honor for that, for that person's existence and legacy. We just, unfortunately, just like with mental health, we are not comfortable with grief, and so we don't know how to welcome it.
Right.
We don't know how to go through it. We try to go around it and over it
Mhm.
and deny it. And at the end of the day, it's a natural process that must be had. Um,
This is true.
are there things that you have relied on that you found in your journey since 2018 in particular that have been healing for you or helpful for you?
Um, yeah, like I said, the biggest thing is to not keep anything in, to just really ask for help, um, to talk about, I'm really having a bad day. And I'm not saying I'm perfect perfect at this because there were days I was just didn't. But for the most part, to ask for help, to have a really deep respect for mental health that I gained, because it's fragile. And unfortunately, I gained it through um, suicide, suicide coming into our lives. But just to have that deeper respect, to really really start to pay attention to um, how I was feeling, and to never say, "Oh, I'll never do that," because Jeff said I would never do that.
Mhm.
And he truly, like, I mean, most people probably don't ever think they would do that they would take their own lives. Um, and so, to, like I said, to just reach out to someone to express how I was feeling, to have that greater respect for mental health, and just researching and reading to help me understand it more, which then helped me get through it and my children get through it.
Mhm.
I don't know. It sounds like I'm saying it over and over again, but I just can't stress anymore that you have someone. It's got to be the right person. So if it doesn't work out the first time, find someone else
Right.
that you can talk to and that can really help you with, because a lot of times too, you think, oh, I know what they're going to say and I know what to do. And then you go and you're like, no, I didn't try that
Mhm.
strategy to help me get through this. To be open to, like I said, having that respect for mental health, and to be open to help from other people, like you're
Mhm.
right, the right person, and to try the things that are recommended to you, and to stick to it, because
Mhm.
you're probably going to have to try it a lot of times. I don't know, 100. I can't even count how many times I tried it, and just kept talking about it, because it's not going to just, you know, be
Mhm.
better the first time you try.
Right. Jeff's legacy and your legacy have had a really positive impact on St. Johns County Sheriff's Office with the call to stop stigma and advocate for speaking out, as you said. What other things would you tell spouses who are maybe going through a change in their first responder, or something that was similar to what Jeff has had gone through?
So I will say, looking back when our son passed away, looking back at the outreach from the sheriff's office that I received, um, and then, Jeff's fear of being stoic, and saying, I've got it, don't worry about it, you don't have to reach out to them. And so I, in my own struggle, gave him more power to say that. And so, like I said, it's looking back now, I I would say to spouses, maybe not give them so much power, which is hard, and I understand, like, if it's a spouse that's going through this with them, um, because of the fact that they are going to keep things in. Like, he sent a text message to me before he took his life, and he stated in it, "No one really knows how I feel." And probably so, because he just didn't feel comfortable in expressing that. And so I look back and go, I gave him too much power in deciding whether I should reach out for him. And because, like I said, in some ways, you're like, I don't know, is this normal grief? Is this normal? I've never been through this before. I'm struggling. What do I do? But if I could look in hindsight back now and say, when maybe I saw the withdrawal, just thinking, instead of going, is that normal? Maybe going ahead and reaching out more and asking those questions, because if he, you get to a point where it gets so deep and he isn't saying anything, he doesn't, he may lose the power to come and say, I need help. I'm going through this. He's not thinking straight. So I would recommend that, just if you see, I mean, I don't know. Would really recommend, if something like that happens, looking up, if you don't know them already, the signs, those are very important, um, to be able to help if you can. And like I said, I didn't really know. I thought it was very strange. What's going on? I talked to some people, he's won't stay in the same room as us anymore, but thought that he just needed his time. But looking back, I think, and from the text, I think I wish I would have said, "Hey, this is what we're doing. Let's go, like together. I feel like you really need this." And I'm going to reach out to people and say, "Hey, Jeff really needs this." And it's going to be okay.
Mhm.
Because all that really matters is that you're okay and still here.
Right. Right.
But
One of the,
a lot of times of course, and you don't, but you don't think that like now he's going to do this, you don't, but still like knowing what I know now. And if I can teach that to other people is to really look for those signs and understand that, especially law enforcement, they don't want to reach out, and that sometimes they don't even realize how bad it is to reach out before it's just too late.
Mhm. All of the things that you're talking about are very central to what the First Responder Project aims to do, and in that we're an agency outside of agencies. We're an organization outside of departments, so that, and in large part, the reason that we started doing family forums, so that there's yet another resource that's that's available to family members, to normalize things, or to figure out, am I alone in this, or do I have a sisterhood or a spousehood of other individuals who can say, yes, I see that all the time, or that was something my spouse went through, and done so anonymously, and not having to, necessarily talk about, provide names, obviously, but just really have fellowship among family members. And I think it would be ideal to have something like that for kids as well. Kids worry about things that we are completely unaware of.
Yes.
They feel silly about bringing their fears up, but they are very aware when they watch the news or when the phone rings, and they wonder, just like we do, if this, this call is the call,
Right.
but they don't necessarily articulate it. They have the same emotions that we do, but they don't have the lexicon or the vocabulary to be able to express it. So I think that we certainly need to reach out as well for.
Yeah. And they have the fear. I can speak for my daughters, the fear of, oh, okay, if you want to talk about for a kid, their whole life changing, like a really secure life, because they are like mentally where they are at that stage developmentally, and then to lose a parent, and then the fear of, oh my gosh, this other parent, not only will I lose this other parent that's here, but this other parent is not functioning like my parent is supposed to function. And they take on all of that and worry so much. I know my daughter's like tried to become it was like roles reversed almost, because they were so worried about, I can't lose this other parent. I got to make sure she's okay because this is not my parent. And so just talking about, like I said, a whole world being turned upside down for the kids, truly. So it is good that that's offered
Mhm.
for the
Are
whole
there
family.
any other things that you'd like to see? Naturally, our listening audience today are supportive of first responders and their families, and hopefully being able to show that, support. What would you like to see the project do moving forward based on our conversation today?
And so, I've thought about that, and there's two things I definitely would like to see: more easily accessible resources for law enforcement, and people that understand the profession as a resource. And when I say a resource, for someone for them to go to and feel comfortable talking to, where they aren't going to be like, yeah, you don't understand our profession and what we really go through. And so I just feel like the more resources they have, something like that, for something like that the people that they can turn to, would be very, very beneficial. And again, people who understand their profession. Um, and support and resources to help change the culture. So there were some about mental health, with law
Mhm.
enforcement. And I know, like for St. Johns County, they have an outreach program that went into place, and they had already started um, really focusing on mental health for law enforcement officers for the sheriff's department. And then after what happened with Jeff, it, brought it to light even more, something that they did not want to happen. And so they have built upon what they had started, and that's what I'm involved in as well. But for this first responders project to be able to help those programs that may already be in place, more resources for them, help build those that are, like I said, that those programs that are in place already in agencies, but just make them bigger, and more accessible, or to help start those type of programs, which is camaraderie within the departments, and therefore that change the culture again to where this is not about, oh, we'll go back to the stoic word, or weak. I'm not stoic. I'm weak. It's I have to ask for help. It's not about that. It's about like, no, you just really got to stay conditioned, and that's what we believe here in this department, in the sheriff's office, or wherever we're talking about. Is it's just about you being able to stay at the level that you need to be at, and that law enforcement officer that you want to be, and change that culture. That this is helpful. This is not, you're not stoic. This is not a bad thing. This is a, we're going to keep you conditioned thing.
Right. This is
I would like to see that, those two things.
So change the culture and teach the culture.
Yes, provide that education, that information, and those resources. As many resources as we possibly can would be fabulous.
Thank you so much for sharing your very personal story, which is tragic and as I said before, has a legacy for first responders and their families, for us to be able to learn how to do everything we can and put all of our resources into preventing suicides among first responders, for empowering family members to be able to reach out and get help for themselves, for the stress that they go through, as well as to look out and be the sheepdog for their sheepdog. So
Right.
Greatly appreciate you spending time with us. Looking forward to working with you in the future. And of course, stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate it very much.
Take care.